It's Monday, March 20th, 2023. My name is Ashton Ellett, here with another installment of the Russell Oral History documentary series sponsored by the Richard B. Russell Library for Political Research and Studies. I'm here today with Mr. Kent Felty. We're in Highlands Ranch, Colorado at his home. Born in Lexington, Kentucky, Mr. Felty grew up in Louisiana, the United Kingdom, and Norway. He earned his bachelor's degree from Louisiana State University and his JD from the University of Tulsa College of Law, where he was active in student government as well as the Tulsa Law Review. A solo practitioner in the area of immigration law with a focus on family-based adjustments of status, consular processing, removal defense, naturalization, and asylum. He is also an internationally recognized expert in the area of human trafficking, including a successful verdict in the landmark John Pickle Company case. Mr. Felty, Kent, thank you so much for inviting us to your home. We've got the Rocky Mountains up over our shoulders here. And thank you for your time and your insights into labor and human trafficking as well.
Well, thank you for being here. It's an honor.
Well, we're excited to gather up this oral history as well as your collection that you're donating to the library. I wonder if we could begin. Tell me a little bit about your childhood and upbringing. You said that you grew up in eastern Kentucky.
Well,
or at least your folks are from.
My folks are from Harlan County and Clay County.
Oh yeah,
which
coal
is
country.
Coal country and really poor, but great people.
Right.
And I'm proud of my roots. They met at Berea College.
Yeah.
Where I was conceived, I'm pretty sure.
Lexington, Kentucky.
No, Berea is a little bit south.
I'm thinking of Transylvania.
Transylvania is in Lexington, but Berea is maybe less than an hour away, a little bit south of Richmond. But I was born in Lexington when my dad went on to get his master's in geology. But anyway, they met at Berea. They were both poor kids, and to go to Berea, it's tuition free.
Right. It's a work base. Everybody has to work.
You work in like in the hotel, the Boone Tavern, or you make, like my mom, pottery.
Okay.
Or you make brooms, or you make rocking chairs. But the university doesn't charge tuition.
Right.
So I was always really proud of Berea, and proud of my roots, and proud of my parents. They have, I am who I am because of them.
Right.
So anyway, they met at Berea, and then at that point in 1959-60, I guess the economy was not doing well.
Mm-hmm.
So my dad had a bachelor's in geology, and really job offers were few and far between. He was going to either go to the Air Force or go to grad school, so he ended up going to University of Kentucky and got his master's, and from there they immediately transferred him to Louisiana, which is oil and gas.
Right.
That's the predominant industry there. And so we moved to all these little towns in South Louisiana, and then eventually New Orleans.
So we talking like Houma, Morgan City.
Right. I can tell that you're familiar with South Louisiana. Houma.
One of our colleagues is from Morgan City.
Oh,
Louisiana.
My goodness. Well, Morgan City and Berwick, which is the rough part of Morgan City, right across the bayou there. We lived there, and I was just little at that time, but I do remember, people grabbing huge turtles out of the ditch and crawfish everywhere and snakes, and it was it's really something down there. And then we moved to the West Bank of New Orleans, and I went to first through third grade there, and just regular suburban life across the river from New Orleans. We'd go to 2 Saints games a year.
Mm-hmm. When they were terrible.
Back when they were terrible. Yeah, I never saw a winning season until I came back from overseas.
Was Archie Manning the quarterback back then?
Back
or is that before
days,
Archie?
There's guys you never heard of. Gary Wood, Gary Cawazzo, Bill Kilmer.
You're right. I've never heard of those
guys. No, these guys. Steve Stonebreaker was the
I've heard that. Now that's one, but only because his name is Stonebreaker.
The Saints were terrible. And it was a big deal for New Orleans to get him, and I'm still a Saints fan.
Did you ever wear a bag on your head?
No, I did not wear a bag, but I did give up on them. And I would in the dorm at LSU. We didn't have a TV, but there was a kind of a common TV, and we would all go down there and inevitably there's, cursing and gnashing of teeth every Sunday. It would be, we're winning, but there's 2 minutes to play, so we'll probably lose. It was just, so it was a shock later on in life to actually be down in New Orleans for a hearing on Super Bowl Sunday. I had a hearing the next day, so I actually got to walk the French Quarter.
Yeah.
When they won the Super Bowl, I think it was Super Bowl 44, there were old ladies
the Colts,
from the 60s, and they would be holding portraits of their deceased husbands and walking through the crowd like, look at what happened. We won the Super Bowl.
It's like when the Cubs won the World Series.
It was exactly like that. So I've got Saints stories for you, but it was really neat to win.
You spent a considerable amount of time in the United Kingdom. Was that, I assume, because of your father being transferred to the? Did he work for British Petroleum?
He actually worked for Exxon. Back in those days, it was Humble Oil. And then it was Esso, and then it became Exxon.
Put the tiger in the tank.
To put a tiger in your tank. So let me turn this phone off.
Oh,
Boy,
sure.
I tell you what, we live by the phone these days.
That's right.
So excuse me for doing that.
No worries.
He, as a geologist, the North Sea was just opening up.
Right.
And we were transferred from this working class neighborhood on the west bank of New Orleans to a 3-story house on a hill about 10 miles from London. So we were, it was south of London in Sutton.
Okay, yep, Sutton and Cheam.
Sutton and Cheam, you amaze me that you even know these places.
That's right.
But it was fantastic. I have a brother and sister that are younger than me, and we all went to the English schools, went to the primary school, and then went to secondary school for a year called Ewell Castle in Ewell, which is a little bit south of Cheam. A little bit south of, I get
that's into Surrey if you get that much.
Right.
Yeah,
that's
much
right.
farther
And back
south,
in those days, Sutton was Surrey.
That's right.
So there was High Street, and there was Sutton, and then there was Cheam, Epsom, Ewell. And Ewell was where this old castle was that they turned into a boarding school. There were day boys, though, so I got to be a day boy there, and it was amazing. I mean, you're in this total. The professors or the teachers or whatever are called masters.
Right.
And the sixth formers, which is the seniors, are prefects. And there's discipline is a big deal. It's the best I ever did academically. It was extremely strict. And if you
now, we're not talking like Oliver Twist.
Oh, not
strict.
Quite Oliver Twist, but it was. I got caned. For instance, and you could get caned for things like cheek, CHEEK.
Yeah, just mouthing off.
That's just kind of mouthing off. Or insolence.
Oh.
Insolence was high degree cheek, and if you were insolent, rebellious, then you got caned. And it all depended. I remember bending over a desk and grabbing the other side of it.
Yeah.
And that cane came down on the top of my butt.
Oh.
And after 2, I collapsed on the floor, and I remember Mr. Garner, God bless him, he get up. It was disgraceful the way I was handling my punishment. So I was like, oh my goodness. But I loved it, and I really enjoyed. I was immersed in English culture. I couldn't speak with an American accent. I had an English, and I had 2 English accents. I had one for the street and one for the school.
Right.
So we're reading some poem, and the line was "lot of little boats," and Cockney, you don't have any T's at all.
Right.
So I'm reading it in class, and I go, "Lot of little boats." No T's whatsoever.
No received pronunciation for you.
And everybody started laughing, but I was so immersed in the Cockney culture, why are they laughing? So it was great, man. I could talk about England all day.
Right.
But eventually, I wanted to go to college in America, and I felt like that I should go to the American school. in St. John's Wood, which is North London, and so I did. And that was totally the opposite. We went from extreme discipline to no discipline. And we could literally, there was an open plan system back in those days where there were no classrooms.
They're like a product of the new left.
Yes, it was. It was, you know, the only thing I learned there was they exposed us to a lot of history.
Right.
And a lot of reading.
Mm-hmm.
But math, forget about it. Science, forget about it. Because I'm not inclined in that direction anyway. Mm. But you could walk out of class and go do whatever you wanted. So I was big for my age, and you know, some of the other bigger boys, we would literally walk out of class and go to the pub as 7th and 8th graders. We would walk down to High Street, St. John's Wood, and we would be playing foosball and just skipping out of school. I mean, I basically hardly ever went. And I never, the report cards they would give us our report cards to take home, but I would never take them home. So I would.
You didn't have to get signatures?
No, it was crazy. So the only way that your parents, and my parents were so young at that time, they had no idea what was going on.
They were busy with their own.
They were busy with, you know, other things, I guess. But, you know, I just ran wild. You know, by God's grace, survived. And it was good that we moved, because in 10th grade I did move to Norway. And Norway was kind of, you know, how London was the opposite of New Orleans. Well, Norway is kind of the opposite of London. You come in and you look down and all you see is just beautiful mountains, green, blue water, fjords. You step off the airplane, it's like you get a shot of oxygen. And it's just, I knew I was going to love it. And I did. I loved it for like a year and a half. But then, you know, I was still a discipline issue. And we would play.
Cheeky or insolent issues?
Rebellious.
No.
And I was just honestly kind of a bad kid. Oh. And anyway, I got kicked out of school there. And it forced my dad to relocate to New Orleans. I was into soccer. I was, to brag, I'll say the good and the bad. The bad was I was an idiot with, you know, I have no discipline. The good was I was really good at soccer. I was probably the best kid in the whole town. And I mean, at my age group, and probably.
That's saying something for an American going over to Europe.
Well, I'd been playing in England.
Yeah.
And the Norwegians were nowhere near the English that way. So I would score 6 goals in a game.
Ooh.
I mean, I was really good. Ooh. So I'll brag a little bit.
But
I was, you know, I got in a fight. We were playing a team from Holland, and I missed a penalty. And the goalie gave me a little bit of, you know, a little trash talking after I missed. The whole city was there to watch us play The Hague, and I missed the penalty, which I never missed a penalty in my life. Yeah. So that night, I punched him out, and
in the game?
No, later that night, downtown Stavanger, and it led to me being expelled for good reason. I didn't hurt him,
right?
But sure. I was just an idiot, and I, you know, in your life you see crossroads, and that was like a big crossroad for me, because we moved back to New Orleans, and I come back to New Orleans, and I had been gone from the United States since I was 8,
right?
And I was almost 17, and it was a shock just to go into the grocery stores. Man, you got a whole row of different kinds of breakfast cereal. There's Count Chocula, and, you know, just a whole row. The grocery stores in England and Norway are no bigger than this room, and you have like shredded wheat and cornflakes, and that's it. So it was a shock to go into grocery stores. I was kind of socially inept with the American kids. You know, they all thought I was Norwegian. And, you know, hey, is it cold in Norway? And all these crazy, and I had never been around, you know, African-American people before. So and they didn't know what to do with me at Mandeville High.
Okay.
So they put me in all these classes with my, African American students, crafts, things. Literally, I learned how to basket weave, and plus I didn't understand what they were saying, because in South Louisiana there's a whole different dialect. So I was a lost soul there too, and I ended up one time, we were on the side of I-12, walking where the embankments are on the interstate, me and like 4 or 5 black kids, and I'm like, what are we doing here? And we're looking for mushrooms. And I'm like, what mushrooms? Yeah, you look, there's a cow patty and then there's mushrooms growing, and then you eat the mushrooms and you go to a different planet. So I basically skipped out of, I didn't learn anything, and it wasn't Mandeville High's fault, but by God's grace, my senior year, I met my first wife. She was the class treasurer. I had never played football, and I went out for the football team. And
we're talking about American football.
American football. And fortunately, I got injured, so I didn't have to expose myself for how bad I was going to really be. But the good news is that it brought me out of one crowd into another crowd.
Right.
And my wife was just awesome and introduced me to a different group, and that was great. And we eventually, college was coming up, and LSU was open admissions, so all you had to do was graduate. So to graduate, I had to pass typing my last semester of high school, and I was driving to school. I was late for my last exam, and I get pulled over.
Oh no!
So I missed my last final, and it was Mrs. Fields. She was so nice. My mom went in and begged her to let me take typing. I think I was at like 20 words a minute, and
that's not great.
By
Kent.
Mrs. Fields' grace. I know, it's
That's
terrible.
That's not great.
It was terrible. I was, I couldn't, from a secondary source, I was just a terrible typist. But by my mom and Mrs. Fields kind of pulled me through, and I graduated in '78. And my wife was going to LSU, my girlfriend, and it was open admissions. I had terrible grades, but I could get in. So I went to LSU in Baton Rouge, and that was another shift, because before starting at LSU, I went offshore like most of the boys do in South Louisiana, and was working in the oil field for the summer.
So offshore being like those big oil rigs out in the
like
Gulf?
I was actually on a crew boat that services those rigs.
Okay.
It's just manual labor on water. But it was cool because I could read, and even though I was a terrible student,
Are you saying that most of the people you were working with couldn't?
Well, no.
Okay.
No, they were good dudes.
Oh, sure.
But
absolutely.
Most people would be playing cards, and I would be in my bunk reading, and I would go out there with a book a day, and I would read, and sometimes I would run out of reading material, so I had a little Good Luck Bible. Mm-hmm. Like they give you in high school. They give you out front.
Especially when you graduate, for
when you're born and you graduate, you always get one of those little Bibles.
Sponsored by the bank in town or something like that.
So I had a little Gideon Bible, and there were other young fellas out there. One was in Bible college, and he'd been a rodeo star, and I was reading something not the Bible, and he's like, "Hey man, what's up with you? What are you doing? What's going on in your life?" And he started asking me questions, and I was like, I don't really know what's going on in my life. These are questions I just haven't asked myself. And he goes, well, I see you got a little Bible there. Do you ever read it? And I was like, no, I just carry it in my car for good luck. And, so he's like, well, you should check it out. So I started reading it, and it changed my life. So I remember being in the lifeboat, which is on top of the top deck. And I remember looking up at the stars and thinking, there's more to this life than just, what I'm doing now. And I prayed a little prayer. Didn't even realize it was a life-changing prayer. Just if you're there, I want to know you. I'm not happy with who I am. I want to make my life count for good. And then I went back to Mandeville, and we were all 18, so we could drink and party, and I had a girlfriend, and so it was back to the usual until I realized that God had taken away those desires, and I quit a lot of things. So I started college as a new Christian, and I had no real understanding of campus ministries or whatever. But when you come out at LSU, you come out of your registration, and I registered for like honors history and every easy class I could find, and they were all meeting at 7 a.m. because I had not pre-registered. So I got an A in honors history and probably did terrible in everything else. I blocked it out, but always loved history because of the English thing. And anyway, I walk out of registration, and there's like all these tables of different churches and different ministries, and I didn't know the difference between any of them, really.
So you hadn't grown up.
Well,
go ahead.
Yeah, no, we were like most folks. We went to church on Sunday, and and if you asked me, what's your religion, I would have said I'm a Christian.
Okay.
Just kidding myself, though, really. I mean, it had no impact on my life.
Okay.
But my desires had changed.
Right.
So all the things that I had felt like I had the freedom to do before, I just didn't enjoy, just straight up. So I walked through these different, and I was unschooled. I had been given a Bible, but I hadn't read a Bible. So I started signing up for every ministry there, regardless of, I don't care what, it could be Chi Alpha, which is charismatic, it could be Campus Crusade, it could be InterVarsity, it could be the Baptist Student Union, it could be the Catholic. My wife was, or my girlfriend at that time was Catholic, so we would go to Mass, and then we would go to the chapel on campus, or, so in my mind, so we could actually learn something, because the Mass is real. If you've ever been to Mass, it's real.
I'm Episcopalian.
Okay, so it's structured, but it's, you got to really dig to find what you want. Whereas if you go to the Bible churches, it's like going to class. They're going to open up the Bible, and they're going to, you're going to read the Bible, not somebody's opinion of the Bible. So it was great until we decided to get married. And hardcore Catholics, they want you to be married in the Catholic Church. So, but we worked it out with my in-laws, and we got married my second year of college. And her name was Chris, and she was awesome. So she graduated, I graduated from LSU and with a journalism degree. And it was kind of like I had job offers from newspapers in little bitty towns all over the place. And I was like, well, I really want to be a lawyer. And
when did that realization?
Oh, I'd always wanted to be a lawyer.
Okay.
But
any reason?
With my grades, I just thought I'd never have a chance.
Yeah.
So I actually took the test, and the test balanced out my grades, so that there are safety net schools that you can get to, and I thought, okay,
we won't name any names.
I'm not going to name any names. So not the University of Georgia.
No.
I didn't waste my application fee on the ones I knew I wouldn't get into, but fortunately, I started being. I was married. I needed to work.
Right.
So I started working. I was actually a 1 hour photo tech.
1 hour photo. Now there's something.
Do you remember 1 hour photos?
There's something.
That film, and then you sit there at the printer, and I was really good at that. I'll brag about.
Now,
two
were you
things.
a Fujifilm guy or?
Well, Fuji and Kodak. The 100 ASA is pretty good for both of them, if you want nice grain. But I'd sit there at that Noritsu printer, and you don't make much money. So I was like, well, look, I think I'm going to go back to school. So I went back to University of Texas and got a paralegal certificate.
So how did you get to Texas?
My wife was a Texas native. if you know anything about Texans,
Yeah.
soon as they,
I'm familiar.
they are very proud people. So we went back to Dallas, and I worked at the 1 Hour Photo. She worked at the mall. We were always broke, and I felt like the only way that I'm ever going to break this cycle is to go to law school, but I don't have the grades. So I went to University of Texas at Arlington, got really good grades there, and that, with a good test score, was going to give me an opportunity. But I kept getting rejection. I think I still have all my rejection letters in a box. I don't know why I keep stuff like
why
that.
would you do that to yourself?
Well, I don't know, man. That's a good question. That's, I probably need some counseling on that. But
No.
so eventually, I started working as a paralegal.
Okay.
And it was amazing how I would stumble into these really high-profile jobs as a paralegal. I mean, we did the first $1 billion lender liability case in Dallas with the Hunt brothers versus like 22 multinational banks.
Okay.
The Hunt brothers had tried to corner the silver market.
That's right.
And there was they borrowed a lot of money, and they secured that money with everything they had. And then the silver price went down, and so they ended up losing everything, really, through bankruptcy. But we sued to give them time, really. All the banks have an obligation, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, it was a whole skyscraper in Dallas of boxes. So whenever I feel sorry for myself with all the boxes I've got, I think back to those days of just sitting there with documents all day. There was an army of paralegals. I was one of them. And then, there's a couple other really great. I ended up with one of the top plaintiffs' lawyers in Houston, a guy named John O'Quinn. O'Quinn was he was a classic Texas plaintiffs lawyer. I mean, the year I was there, he made $40 million, which is a lot. And I got the impression, this is right before I went to law school, that all you got to do is write a letter and get $1 million.
Man, I wish.
Well, I mean, because that's what we did. We would do, all kinds of real high dollar litigation, and I loved it. I had a really good boss, and Mr. O'Quinn was super nice to me, and I was making more money. I was probably at like $36,000 a year, which was huge in those days. That was a big deal. And then I finally got into law school. I got into Tier 3, and the one that made the most sense was Tulsa. So my wife and I, we had a child. I can't believe I forgot Matt.
Sorry, Matt.
Sorry, Matt. If you ever see this, I love you, buddy. But we had a kid in '87, and then and he was born in Dallas. Then we moved to Houston, and on to Tulsa. In Tulsa, I couldn't believe I got in there because it's a really good school.
It is a good law school.
And I'm like, I had never visited. I had visited Tulsa once.
Tulsa is an underrated town.
It is an
underrated town.
I had been there once. This flashback to soccer. I tried out for the Tulsa Roughnecks.
Okay.
And of course didn't make it. But I remember saying, I came back to Louisiana and I told my wife, I'm never going back to Oklahoma. I hate Oklahoma, especially Tulsa. So it was, one of those deals. When I went back, it's beautiful. The red buds are in, and the Bradford pears, and the actual school is beautiful.
You got Holland Hall.
It's so nice,
place,
man. Yeah. It's so nice. And it's like a little hidden jewel. I could get from my house to the airport in 20 minutes. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you live in Dallas or Houston, you can't get to the quick trip in 20 minutes. It's just that you spend your whole life worrying about your route and how
You're
fast.
A confirmed Oklahoman because you went with Quick Trip as your gas station
I'm always
reference.
shocked when people know Quick Trip is the best convenience store in the world. So so I got into TU. And I always called it, UT? I always used to UT.
UT's Texas.
That's Texas, so they say TU. And, I had been working for law firms for 4 or 5 years at that point. So the vocabulary was not new. The whole thing was not intimidating.
Right.
Which, when you first walk into a law library and you see all those books before computers, you get the impression you're going to have to read them all. And you just think, there's no way. I'm on a fool's errand here. I need to do something else.
Right.
So you can get totally psyched out, and that's why a lot of kids will just drop out or freak out. And because if you don't have the vocabulary, they're not going to teach you. They're going to, and you don't know where you stand, because until you take your final exam, you've got an A, and or an F, and so you go through the whole semester. Then you take one test, and then you wait 2 or 3 months to get your grade. You don't know if you're on probation. You don't know if you flunked out. You don't
Sounds
know.
like a heck of a system, kid.
Oh, it's massive. It's sadistic, really. And I remember speaking out and saying, this was the time when critical legal studies was beginning at Harvard, and we were, I'd say, forced to do what they called legal thought, which is just jurisprudence. It's just another word for it. But we had to read a lot of critical legal studies, which is real challenging. And there are parts of it I bought into, like the whole hierarchy issue.
Sure.
Why do we start being labeled and placed in position based on one test after you could study every day, go to class, and flunk. It just made no sense. Excuse me. So anyway, I was blessed and did pretty well that first year because I wasn't intimidated. And
you would have been 8, 9, 10 years older than most of the one else,
I was an older
right?
student. I was 30.
Non-traditional.
I was 30.
Okay, so about 8 years.
Some kids coming out of college, and everybody was real competitive except for me. And I didn't. We would have study groups at my house, and I was really good at civil procedure. I'm going to brag again. They're going to think I brag about everything. But I got the top grade in the class in civil procedure, which is the hardest class, because I had been doing this job for 5 years, not because I was smarter than everybody else. Anyway, so it was a huge honor to be number one in that class and in the legal thought class. Mm-hmm. And I'm conservative, but there were things I liked about that critical legal studies. And I know it's, nowadays it's controversial, but in those days it was just kind of a new thought that we could eliminate final exams. And I was all about it.
Right.
I'm like, you shouldn't be labeled and placed in position based on this. It's just dumb. There's other things.
You have one bad day. And
right. Exactly. But anyway, at the end of my first year, life was good, and my wife got cancer about that time, and we thought everything was going according to plan, but she was allergic to one of the drugs they were giving her, and the doctor was having a bad time in his life, and we trusted 100%, and she ended up dying of bleomycin toxicity. And I had done med-mal cases before with Mr. O'Quinn, so I knew there's negligence everywhere here. But I was, the first thing you do is you focus on, I got a 5-year-old, I'm in law school. But then, you realize this was not right, the way they treated her. And I'm thinking, the way I operate in my mind is, if you're wrong, confess and go forward. And if you did something wrong, I've committed malpractice myself. So, but every time I have, is to my knowledge, it's not been often, but I always, sunlight is the best disinfectant, right? So I thought the doctors would operate in the same fashion, and they don't. They immediately go for cover, and they litigate to the bitter end. So that was the next 10 years of my life. I litigated really by myself against, the people that I thought had mistreated my wife. and it was I actually ended up talking to one of the lawyers. The lawyers weren't bad people, but that was their job.
The attorneys for
For
doctor's
the
practice
doctors and all of them.
yeah.
So, but I remember running into him in the grocery store, and he was like, dude, think hard before you do it, because a wrongful death case, you're representing yourself. It's just dumb. And I wrote him a letter, and I laid all the evidence out, and I was like, why don't we settle this? I never intended to go all the way, because I can't afford it. Because you gotta buy doctors to testify against doctors. So hopefully this is useful to some young lawyer before you hit 63. But I mean, it was 10 years of fighting a losing battle that eventually was settled,
Right.
for nuisance value, I would say. But by that time, by God's grace, I've had two, besides my mama, I've had two wonderful women in my life, and I was coaching Little League football, and I met my wife, Rebecca, and then by God's grace, shortly thereafter, that case was settled, gave us a little bit of a cushion, and got me off of what I was doing, which was, I was a bottom dweller at the courthouse more than anything.
How do you mean?
Well, in Tulsa County, the third floor of the courthouse is preliminary hearings, and divorces. So it's family law and low level, not even low level, just crimes. So you're up there on the third floor doing low level crimes and divorces. And I always told people, if I'm on this floor, man, I am definitely broke, okay? Because there's no redeeming. It's just a really hard
Just
life.
one of those things that has to be done, and somebody
I've seen
now.
lawyers in my group that will literally stand outside the courtroom and, what do you got in your pocket? $50, okay, I'll represent you.
I never saw that on Matlock.
It was awful. It was an awful experience, but and then this guy that I had represented called me, and he said, hey, we've met some Indian dudes, and I had remarried, but we were broke.
Right.
And it was just awful. And I mean, we were just, I had 3, bonus sons plus mine, and they were all boys in their teenage years. And boys in
You
their
had to buy
teenage
groceries.
years, well, they should be all like chained to a tree in Montana. That would have been, so we, boys that age, they are rough. Now, they're not all rough in the same way, but
Sure.
it was quite the experience. On my gravestone, I want to say, like Royal Tannenbaums, he said, saved his family from a sinking battleship. I want something similar about blending a family of 4 boys, because it was my greatest accomplishment. I mean, and now I love all my sons, and I've got grandkids, and it's, life is good.
Yeah.
But at the time, we were broke, and we were blending a family, and it was really tough. And then this guy calls and says, hey, there's some Indian guys that I met at church, and I think they're really in bad shape. And my first reaction is, how are they going to pay me? I'm just, what am I supposed to do? They're in Atlanta at that time.
Okay, so was this Mark Massey?
This is Mark
Massey.
Okay,
Who contacted you?
Let me have as they say, sidebar. On Mark Massey is a dude that was living in a really nice house in Pretty Water, Oklahoma, which is in Creek County, and he's just the most pure, kindest person that you will ever meet. And I represented his brother. Anyway, Mark had, some of these fellows from the John Pickle plant had crawled under the fence. There was a little Pentecostal church right beside the factory. And I think it was just 2 of them maybe. They had gone under the fence, and this is a concrete
So this
block.
was two of, and this is jumping ahead,
Yeah.
52
Yeah,
or
that's
so?
right. 252.
Okay.
They had crawled under the fence. There's this concrete block, real primitive Pentecostal church. This is a rough part of Tulsa. They're in the back crying. Mark is the kind of guy that doesn't walk past people that are crying. It's especially in church. So he's like, "What's wrong? What's going on?" And they spilled the beans on Mr. Pickle. You know, we have slave labor going on.
So
over there.
Mr. Pickle's to be clear, Mr. Pickle is a living, breathing person, not just the name of a plant.
He's a dude that had a steel plant.
Okay, and it was named after him.
John Pickle Company.
The John Pickle Company.
It's a huge facility over in I guess it would be East
Tulsa. Yeah.
Right. And you know, he's a self-made man. He's from Mississippi, and he's, you know, I mean, I could talk about Mr. Pickle all day. He's you know, I have more sympathy now than I did at the time, but he had collected his own. I mean, he created his own plantation over there. He was paying these guys a couple of dollars an hour. The Americans were making 20. These are welders.
Okay, so we're talking what we would call skilled labor.
Very
All
skilled
labor is skilled, but this is skilled labor.
These guys were trade tested in India.
Okay.
The whole thing with human trafficking, we could talk for hours.
Right.
But the process is you target a community that is long suffering and speaks English. That's India. I mean, they don't complain. I've been to India, and it's a really poor country, but they put a high priority on education, and they work hard, and it's hot, and they're used to it, and they don't complain. So Mr. Pickle took advantage. They pay everything they have to a labor consultant. They say labor consultant in India, and this guy bribes whoever he needs to bribe at our consulate and our embassies in India and around the world. This goes on around the world, where they go in with a stack of passports. They get them all stamped. And these guys have given up their passports, so they can't go anywhere.
Okay.
So they paid everything to the labor consultant. Then they give up their passports. The guy says, "I'm going to get you a green card. You're going to America." So he meets them at the airport, and then they ask for more money. So these guys their pockets are emptied before they ever get on the plane. Their passports are recollected, so they have no status and no money, and then they're transported to Tulsa, Oklahoma. At that time, there's one house for like 50 guys. And they were it was like the black hole of Calcutta in there. And then you have, they built another little dorm. They put an armed guard out front. They lock the gates. And they make these guys do very lucrative work for nothing, for no money. But they have a place to sleep. They have food. If you go through the trial transcripts, you're going to find that Mr. Pickle paid for, I think it was, we discovered during trial, you know how these catering companies come in?
Yeah.
How many people do you need to feed? I need to feed 20. He's got 50-something, 52, I think. So he orders enough food for 20 guys.
So it's half rations.
Half rations. And some of them start complaining. The Indian people are real into their diet and their spices, and a lot of them are vegetarian. So where do they get their protein? The vegetarians, it's milk. So he tells them they're complaining about food. If he had treated them right, there would have never been a John Pickle case. But he's like, real men don't drink milk. That's for kids. So he wouldn't provide milk. And then they'd say, well, we need some fruit. And he'd go, fruit? Oh, here's an apple. And he would cut it into quarters. Here's your part. Here's your part. I mean, crazy stuff like that. He would bring them out to his house to do yard work. I mean, you know, for a favor, but not for a favor. You know, I want all you guys over here trimming my trees in the Oklahoma heat. and just mistreating them. If they complained, he called the sheriff's office, which is where Mark Massey jumps into the scene.
Right.
They're trying to deport these guys.
The two guys that...
No.
Okay.
Seems like it was like, he made examples of it, seems like 7 guys.
Okay.
7 or 8 guys. Put on them, had them escorted with a SWAT team. This is back when the whole terrorism thing was huge.
So post-September 11.
So you got some little brown guys with a SWAT team surrounding them, and they put them on an airplane in Tulsa with no problems. They have a guy, a couple of prison guards, former prison guards, escorting him all the way back to India, but they get off the plane in Atlanta to change planes.
As one
Mark
does.
Massey is busting it, calling everybody he knows, trying to, hey, there's these guys, they're being held hostage basically on these airplanes. So somebody intervened, I think it was Homeland Security, I guess, intervened in Atlanta and told them they were free. And somehow they didn't have to get on the plane back to India, but they needed to get back to Tulsa. Mark and I guess his church probably jumped in. I still don't know how they got from Atlanta back to Tulsa.
Okay.
But they did, and then they came to my office. And that's where we get to, how am I going to get paid?
Did you have any experience in these kind of cases? You were just stuck.
Immigration was like, is that 2 M's? I could barely spell it. I didn't know anything. I had been doing low-level litigation and a massive med-mal case of my own, and that was my career.
Okay.
So these guys come in, and the minute I see them, they have been through hell. I mean, they're wearing the same clothes they've been wearing. They got no,
How old were they at this time?
In 30s, I would say.
Okay.
They smelled terrible to the point where I had people in my building complaining, don't bring those guys up here. And I was like, I don't care, man. These guys have been held hostage, and I don't really, you're going to just have to get used to it. This is my office. This is where I work. So, so we created a little bit of a stir in the office, but they came in, and then me and Becky were together. I was like, this is something I can't turn a blind eye to. I don't know how I'm going to do it. Maybe I can get some help. So, but before I do that, I need to see if there's real unity in this group of 50 guys. So Rebecca and I get in the car, and we drive to the worst part of Tulsa. There's a little hamburger stand right in front of the factory, and I drive past it. I don't see anybody. This is dangerous. And Becky's like, I think I see some guys behind that hamburger stand. So I pull a Huey, I pull up to the hamburger stand, and before I'm out of the car, I'm surrounded. I got 50 guys, and they're in tears. And it's just, I'm like, I don't know what to do.
Have they been turned out of the factory?
No, they've all crawled. They found found a spot where they can get under. It's a ditch. We even took pictures of it. There's a ditch and a chain link fence, and you can get under. So somehow they all got under. And we were sitting there or standing there, and I'm looking around, and I don't even know what to tell them. But I'm like, if you guys want to leave, you can leave anytime. You're free.
Right.
I don't know that they're not free at that time. So they're like, okay. And I tell them, you've got a lawyer. Here's a card. Boom, 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 boom. We'll go talk to Mr. Pickle tomorrow. So we did, and we thought we can work this out. It's a misunderstanding. But, Mark is with me, and Mark is not into low profile. Mark has arranged for the newspapers and the TV and protests. And so they all gather outside Mr. Pickle's office at the factory demanding justice, really. And I'm thinking, how we can, well, I hope he gives it to him because I don't know how to get it. And, of course, he kicks them out. And they all end up living at Mark Massey's house in Prettywater. I mean, you've got 50 guys living in one house out in the country, and they're literally fishing. There's a pond for food. Mark empties his whole house. He moves out. And they've got all these guys living there, and it's just, it's amazing. Then they have some churches kind of jump in, and the Indian Society there jumped in, and people started becoming aware because of the media. And then I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm a solo practitioner with no money. What am I going to do? So I start shopping this case around to Tulsa, and really nobody's interested, because they're, it's a unique case, and they're all thinking this could be a money drain forever, which it turns out is true. But at the time, I'm like, I need help. So I get one call from Catholic Charities, an offer to help. And there's a guy named Joe McDoulet, who's with the FBI now. Joe comes in. I didn't know what a T visa had just been created. T visa is for victims of human trafficking, but it just started, and there weren't even regulations. Nobody really knew what to do with them. I didn't know what to do with them for sure, but Joe comes in, and he takes these detailed 50-page affidavits that are in these boxes from each man, and that turned the whole case, because it's super detailed. I met with this guy, and I gave him this much, and then I came here, and they treated me like this, and really clear. This is
so that there was a pattern.
And it's 50 of them.
And everybody's got the same-ish story.
So, and it helped us get over so many humps later on when we were really in the middle of litigation, because we already had our case. Before Joe took all these affidavits.
Where had Joe been working before he came onto the case?
Joe was working with Catholic Charities.
Okay, so he worked with Catholic Charities.
So he would come in, and then he would do some of them in Oklahoma City. He would come to Tulsa and do some of them in my office, and basically gave his life up for all these guys for quite a while. It takes a day to do an affidavit, a good one. So, 50 days. Working days, and I know he worked till midnight several times. I mean, he's just an amazing, him and Mark Massey, and there's another guy I'll tell you about later, but those two guys kept this case going, and I was just, I was providing just moral support more than anything, and I was actually the guy in court. So I would go into court, and the first thing we did is we got them to return their passports. And
JPC still was in custody of those passports?
Yeah, they wouldn't give them up. So we got the passports, and the judge was like telling them off. Judge Egan knew, we were blessed with her, because she knew right away this is a big deal. And she knew more than I did at that point. And anyway, and then we start fighting, as you do when you litigate, depositions and depositions. We kept going.
Did you ever depose? Sorry for interrupting, but did you ever depose the non-Indian American workers? To compare and contrast.
It's all in those boxes.
Okay.
Yeah, we knew, and the thing is, when John Pickle Company was exposed, they closed their plant. So we found out from some of the American guys that the plant was closed, and I lost my job. Thanks a lot. And we were like, well, dude, what are we supposed to do? I mean, you're working for a crook. So, we took all the depositions. We worked our butts off. I was still kind of like directing traffic and trying to drag a big firm. I needed help.
Right.
Joe was doing the T visas. That's a completely different job. And I was doing the litigation, and I needed a big firm with big money to come in and help me. So I picked a plaintiff's firm. The guy was running for governor. He was real prominent. A guy named Gary Richardson, still prominent, still runs for governor every time there's an election. But they, I got to be careful, because they're, I don't want to. They were extremely disappointing, and not Mr. Richardson himself, but people assigned to that. They just.
It didn't work out.
My opinion of lawyers has moderated over the years. Before I was a lawyer, I had a lot of respect, and as I've grown older, this was one of those times when you realize that, bad character abounds in every profession. So I'm going to just stop right there.
Sure.
But I was blessed when that firm got out. It was about the time I get a call from a guy with the EEOC, and he's on vacation in Florida with his family, and his name is Robert Canino. So there's three real total heroes in this whole scenario, and Robert would be the next one. Mark, and then Joe, and then Robert. Robert comes in, and we're about to go to trial, and I'm like a deer in the headlights, you know, and they're thinking they're going to be clubbing a baby seal with me, so they're, because they've just totally out lawyered me and outspent me. I couldn't even afford to get copies out of Kinko's. It was that bad. So, but Robert, and we're talking on the phone, and I go, look, man, this is a great case. I'm just overwhelmed. If you want to get in, by all means, there's a pretrial conference next week. You should come and beg the judge. So we go in with Judge Egan, and I'm there, and the other firm bails out, making it look like I'm hard to live with, which I don't think I am, but that's their perspective. So they bail out. The guy walks back out of the courthouse, and he say, hey, man, no hard feelings. And, you know, I still have a little bitterness, I got to tell you, because they wasted time. And then they bailed right on the eve of trial. Robert steps in, and I'm sitting there with the judge, and I'm like, Your Honor, I'm almost in tears. I don't know what to do. This case is so important. It needs to be done right. And we have Mr. Canino here from the EEOC, and I wish you would hear from him before we set this, you know, for whichever day we're going to try it. And Robert steps up, and the judge looks totally relieved, because she doesn't want to see this case mishandled by a solo practitioner either. So Robert gets up there and begs her, and I beg her, and finally she says, okay, the EEOC is getting in this case. We're going to push the scheduling order aside. We're going to consolidate these two. You know, Mr. Felty, you represent the plaintiffs, and then Mr. Canino has the EEOC, the government's interest in this whole thing. And then I go get Johnny Parker, who teaches at University of Tulsa. He's a big old guy. He played basketball for Ole Miss, and I needed help. You know, I needed some physical help. And mental too, because I felt like I was getting beat up. And Johnny steps in there, and Johnny's a very impressive, you know, I was happy to have him by my side. So all of a sudden I had Johnny Parker, a professor, and I have Robert Canino, the top guy for the EEOC, and me. And I'm back to directing traffic and thanking God for the help. So we ended up, you know, Robert got in, and Robert just like destroyed these guys on in the discovery phase that we had not completed.
Right.
And then we go to trial, and it was the most. People were coming. The judge was calling people to come watch, because it was just such an amazing trial. And we split up the witnesses, but Robert was. There was just, it was just one. And you've got the transcripts now. What he did, it was like, I felt like, if you're a basketball fan, you know Michael Jordan. Yeah. And then there's Steve Kerr.
All right.
So I'm Steve Kerr, and I'm watching Michael Jordan, and he is.
Was Steve Kerr the point guard?
He's the little white point guard.
Yeah, he was a point guard.
So like,
Jordan was a shooting guy.
He gets to shoot like 5 times a game.
Yeah.
And Jordan is
if he's shooting, there's a problem.
That's right.
Or he's wide open.
So I'm Steve Kerr. Johnny is the rebounder, and Robert is Michael Jordan in the trial, and he just destroys these guys. It was so bad. We were all the pain was, you know, we were vindicated. So we won on all of that.
What's the timeline here from the call from Mark through that trial?
Mark called in like 2001 maybe, and it seems like we went to trial like 3 or 4 years later.
Oof.
Yeah, it was a long process, and that's just the first trial, and that was like 2 or 3 weeks of witnesses. You know, what happened to you? And then, so it was our witnesses, and then their witnesses were just, the lies were just, it was laughable. I mean, it was just, I've never seen such a crushing defeat in the courtroom. And it was nice to be on the right side. I mean, we were doing God's work there, really. And then the judge says, okay, she gives us everything we asked for except for money. She goes, okay, we're going to have to deal with damages. That's going to and I've run out of time with you guys because every witness is coming with a different language. You know, they've got like 6 languages that I think they have 18 official languages or more than that. But we're operating with various languages. So it's really time consuming. So the judge is like, okay, we can't keep going like this. We need to do the damages phase later, and I'll set you for. So she set us for maybe a year or so later.
So the first try, what was alleged by you and the plaintiffs?
Gosh.
What were so I assume
The causes
federal labor standards, or
we had fair labor standards violations.
Mm-hmm.
That's minimum wage stuff.
right, and civil rights,
Civil rights. We had Civil War statutes that
slavery,
peonage, slavery.
debt peonage.
That's not legal, and fraud. To me, the whole case, besides the slavery aspect, which is new slavery, and versus Old Testament slavery or whatever you want to call it, like Old South slavery.
Yeah, chattel slavery.
Chattel slavery. There's lots of ways to enslave people, is what I found out. And if we talk all day about that, but it's very subtle, and it's extremely effective. It's more effective than chains, because there are invisible chains. When you target a village in India that has educated their boys to be welders, which I've actually visited those places. And the whole city, the whole town, it's dirt roads, but they're building their own hospital out of brick. They have a nursing school. They're teaching nurses. They're teaching the boys how to weld. And you go into a town like that and you rip them off, that's a low point in life. So these guys, these recruiters, were doing that, and I lose my train of thought because I can see the whole thing in my mind's eye, that when you're stealing from people that can't afford to be ripped off, and it's just awful.
Well, I was reading through the facts of the case, and one thing that stood out, or at least was important, was you had to spend time establishing that these 52 individuals were actually employees and not trainees.
Yes, and that's where I was going.
Okay.
Thank you for getting me back on track.
Hey, happy to do
these
it.
guys were not trainees. They had been skill tested. They were the best of the best.
And when you have a training program that has to be approved, there are key elements that have to be met, and these men were employees.
They were employees, and Robert was the one that crushed their whole. It's a facade. It's an H1 trainee. You can't pay them. They have to.
They can't displace full-time workers.
They have to have a foreign employer that sends them over to learn.
Yeah.
Well, these guys already knew. These were the best they had. They created a straw man overseas. Oh, you actually work for Al Samet or some other company. And then you come over here, and they're just like regular employees, and we had to prove that. And you're going to have all these boxes of credentials. Credentials was just mind-crushing work, because I'm not a welder, and Robert's not a welder, but you got to go through all their qualifications and prove they're not trainees. They never were trainees. Mm-hmm. So if they're not trainees, they're employees. You're using the wrong visa, so it's visa fraud to start with. And then you get them over here, even if you're on a work visa as an employee, you have to pay people minimum wage or prevailing wage. Mm-hmm. So anyway, Robert's the guy that dug through all of the technical stuff.
Right.
And the judge was kind of like, of course they're employees. I mean, what are you thinking? And then, my claim to fame, I had like 2 or 3 moments of glory, is they were the lawyers for Mr. Pickle were saying, well, that was done by somebody else. No, that was Mr. How did he? That was Pickle, but not Mr. Pickle individually responsible for that. And I'm like, well, Judge, Mr. Pickle, his company is an alter ego. It's one and the same. That's a really complicated, you usually have to prove a lot more than just saying it. Mm. But we had already gone there, and the judge was like, of course.
So this was a privately held company?
No, this was like on the record, you'll see it. And we all looked, me and Robert and Johnny look at each other, and we're like, did we just, and it was all because they objected. That's the cardinal rule if you're going to be an attorney, young people, is don't object if they're not hurting you, just to feel like a lawyer. It's not worth it. So they objected just to feel good about it. And I'm like, Judge, we have an alter ego here. And she's like, yeah, exactly. And we moved on. And everybody looks around like, wow, she just dealt with one of the main points. Boom. And at that point, it's like, we're going to tear them up. So that was just a great feeling, and it came by accident. So many of these things that happened in the John Pickle case were, just like providence is what the old people call it.
Right.
It's God's hand. It's stuff that we didn't really plan. We just stumbled into, because we had our heart in the right place. Is my feelings is it wasn't because we were so great, but we were determined to get justice. And so with Robert and Johnny and Joe and Mark, we ended up getting justice to a point. That second trial, in case you're interested, was such a disappointment, though, because as it turns out, they had been hiding assets all along. So by the time we got Judge Egan's order, here's the amount of dollars you're going to get, we couldn't collect it. So my next step, and the EEOC, God bless them, that's not their job. That was truthfully my job to collect. Okay, so we got a piece of paper. So we go back through and we find out, okay, the factory's closed, things are sold off, and there's just nothing to get. So we, hire a guy, and he does some depositions, and he tells me exactly that. There's no money. And I'm like, I can't believe it. And but I know that he's transferred some assets to a son-in-law. So I decide this guy's not very good. He, has a good dog and pony show. Mm-hmm. I can collect all your money. And I'm thinking the whole time, that means I can pay my taxes and my student loans and maybe buy a house. And, I was counting the dollars. I wasn't all altruistic about this. I was wanting to get paid.
Sure.
So this one fellow didn't do a good job, and I had to jump in, and not knowing much about collections, not knowing really anything, I filed a fraudulent conveyance action against Mr. Pickle. That's where you transfer assets to a family member to avoid a judgment. It's just
I've seen a King of the Hill episode about this, right, where Buck Strickland transfers Sugarfoots to Hank because he's getting a divorce.
Well, that's exactly right. Well, so he had transferred everything. So I get in there, and I'm, of course, the biggest law firm in Tulsa is on the other side, and the judge is about to retire from the bench, and she needs a job with a
white shoe firm.
Right, right. And Shallcross, I don't mind saying her name. She's a crook. Sorry, I'm retiring soon. So anyway, we get in there, and on a technicality, she dismisses the fraudulent conveyance action. On a case, you have Babu Chellan et al. Et al. Just means the other 50 guys. Because to just type those names, it's 2 pages. Yeah. So I put, Babu Chellan, lead plaintiff et al. Versus John Pickle and all the bad guys. And then they come in. I'm in Colorado. I drive all the way there, and for a hearing with Judge Shallcross, and this guy comes up for Hall Estill and gives me a little piece of paper. It's the pleading code in Oklahoma, because we're in state court, and it says you need to name whoever, the parties need to be named, right? So I'm like, I didn't name them. And the judge's like, you didn't name them. they don't know who's suing. And I'm like, Your Honor, we've been fighting for 5 or 6 years now. They know every one of these guys. Plus,
Pull the
in
federal
the first
district court
paragraph,
transcript.
yeah, and I go, all plaintiffs are referenced by, incorporation, da, 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 da. I had it in the first paragraph instead of the actual. I was lazy. I didn't want to type 2 pages of Indian names. So I just put it in the paragraph by reference, the case number across the street in federal court. These are the guys. There's no surprise. They know who they are. And Judge Shallcross, looking for her little cushion as she gets off the bench, says, no, I'm going to dismiss it. And I'm like...
Was it dismissed with prejudice?
No.
Okay.
Well, yeah.
Oh.
Except for this has a happy ending, thankfully. I remember Robert was there, and EEOC, just as a courtesy, was there to back me up, but really not involved in collections. So me and Robert go outside Tulsa County Courthouse, and I'm like, dude, I can't believe I spent years of my life, and it comes to this crooked judge. And, I'm like, I don't even know if I really want to be a lawyer. Why did I even do this? This is just dumb. I should have been a soccer player. I don't know. I just remembered Robert was like, I feel so bad for you, man. You're the only person that's really not whole out of this whole deal. And I'm like, yeah, I can't feel sorry for myself because what do I do now? So I appealed it and had a huge victory in the Oklahoma Supreme Court. So that's another 2 years down the line, and I'm living in Colorado, and my practice has changed, and I do all immigration, and my life is better. So I go back to Tulsa with my new Supreme Court victory and a new judge, and I'm ready to go, except for the fact that all the men are whole. It's been years, and it's ancient history for them.
Have they been living in the United States working?
The whole time, yeah,
Okay.
The whole time. So they were kind of like, well, we really, good luck, but we don't really want to cooperate. I hate to say it like that. It's not that they didn't want to cooperate.
They wanted to move on.
They wanted to move on, and I was asking for some money to support this, the costs of going back and forth and copies. I had learned the hard way that litigation is super expensive, and you better get your clients on board, or you're going to end up, halfway across the stream, and you're going to fall off your horse, and then you're going to be embarrassed, and it's not going to do anybody any good. Mm. Finances, I've learned, is a really big part of litigation. You would have thought that I would have known that before. But anyway, they weren't supportive, and I dismissed it without prejudice. And I wrote them a letter, and I gave a copy of that letter to Cindy, and I was like, hey, if you guys want to do this, there's a deadline. And I'm, right now, if you want to do it, I'll do it. But if you don't want to do it, no hard feelings. I'm a richer man for it, for knowing you guys. I mean, you changed my life for good. And, we didn't collect, oh well. And nobody really cared about it. I mean, they were like, okay, thanks a lot. There's 5 or 6 guys sent me $100. And I was like, thank you. That's really generous when you're, $100 is a lot of money. So that was the end of the John Pickle case right there. And it was like a go out with a whimper. Come in with a bang, go out with a whimper. It was one of those deals, but we put the bad guys out of business. And me personally, and all the people that worked on the case on the right side, were blessed. I mean, now I live in Colorado. I have a decent immigration practice. I had no interest when I first met the Pickle guys in immigration. I wanted to, do plane wrecks and high dollar plaintiffs work and make a lot of money. And
you want to be John O'Quinn.
I wanted to be John O'Quinn, and as it turns out, God knew better, because right now at 63, watching the young people litigate, like my son, for instance, it's aggressive, it's hard work, and it's a heart attack waiting to happen. Now I go to work and I don't ever think to myself, am I doing the right thing? because I am. I know I am. It's not. It's technical, but there's no serious moral issues. I mean, we can talk about one day. We'll have a reformed immigration process, but generally, I come home and sleep great, and I'm thankful because at my age and in my condition, kind of heavy and all that, I'd probably be dead if I had stayed with litigation. And I've got grandkids now, so it all came out in the wash. That's the John Pickle case.
So it's fair to say, to summarize, that your life and career was changed by the JPC
Huge
case.
Huge crossroads.
So I have a question. This is a very practical question, but how were you able to live and support your family and your children during these 4 years?
That's a fantastic question. I sold my home.
Not to pry too much.
I mean, I sold my home in Tulsa, and that provided. My wife is a nurse practitioner. I mooched off of her, and I'm trying to think how else we did it. I don't know. It's like
you just did it.
It's the bread and the fish deal. You're like, how 5,000 people? Well, how many fish?
Yeah.
So I don't know how we got through it. Eventually, and it took years, I learned immigration. And immigration is not hitting home runs. It's hitting singles and staying on base.
Yeah.
And moving around and understanding the process is flawed.
Whitey ball, as us Cardinal fans would call it.
Exactly.
Whitey Herzog.
So, yeah, it was, but I'll tell you, it was, you ever talk to folks that have been through the Depression, how they're scarred?
Mm-hmm.
To this day, really more, in the past couple of years, I've been feeling better, but, you get, once you've been worrying about grocery money, it stays with you. And I was raised in my mom and dad, I had everything I wanted.
Right.
And, but, professional life has not been, I've been blessed in other ways, is the way I would say it. And then, you stick with something long enough, you get good at it, and people start paying you, and then it's ancient history. And honestly, the Pickle case changed my career. If I had to go back and start doing, car wrecks and divorces and bank robberies, I just don't, I wouldn't want to do that again.
You go back to the Walmart photo center.
Yeah, no, man, I just, there's other things that,
Right.
it's, so this is a really, I'm in a great place. My wife and I, our life verse is, somewhere in the prophet Joel, it says that God has restored the years the locusts ate. And we both had years the locusts ate. And it wasn't any fun, but here we are, and we're living in our dream city, and our kids are healthy, we're healthy, our cars, they run. I remember having cars, you're like, man, I hope this car starts, or I hope I can, do other things. I hope I
Right.
can help the kids when they get married, and all the things that every other family struggles with. But we've come out well. I mean, I'm looking around, man, there's Denver right there. My house, there's no leaks. It's good. And my car runs.
Before we move on, and I do want to talk about what life is like now in Denver, but sort of a meta or a deeper level question is that if you were never able to collect that $1.3 or $1.4 million restitution, what good was the Pickle case in terms of legal precedent or how can other attorneys or you or others, if we want to talk about the Falcon Steel case or something like that, how can the Pickle decision be applied to other cases in that same vein?
Well, it's kind of like the Wright brothers got off the ground.
Oh, wow.
A little, I don't know for how many.
Yeah, it was like
100 yards,
20 seconds,
20 feet off the ground for 20 seconds. When Robert and Joe and I started, and Johnny, when we started this case, we had to create and move and groove. It was how it's affected litigators after that. The things we did, nobody else had done. Now, there had been the Department of Justice, a guy named Lou DeBaca, had done some big cases out in the Pacific, Guam, I think, or some other place, some other island out there. So there had been, in a criminal context, there have been trafficking cases, but there had never been any real civil case before John Pickle. Definitely not with 52 guys. So we began, how do you handle 52 guys that all speak different languages, and the various layers of fraud and all that. So the first thing we did is we just shotgun the petition. So it gives you're going to lose some of these causes of action eventually as you amend your petition, but we found out what worked and what didn't work. We managed the expectations of the clients and blah, blah, blah. And we got off the ground. Then from there, you go to Falcon Steel. No support from the government on that one, and we can talk about it in a minute. But, that was not, that created law on racketeering charges in Louisiana, which have been followed.
Would this be civil or
all civil,
criminal?
All civil.
So, okay, another sidebar. So when I hear, RICO, racketeer, influence, corrupt organization or operation, I think of the mafia.
Right.
And organized crime doesn't have to be the mafia. Organized crime. How is it? But that's always in a criminal context that I'm understanding.
Well,
or I think the general public understands it.
Everything you just said, that's what I thought. I thought RICO.
Yeah.
RICO is you're targeting mafia,
right?
And laundering money. They have a laundromat, or a restaurant or whatever, and they move the money through these legitimate corporations, and there's all kinds of elements. It's really pretty complicated.
Yeah.
But civil RICO is even more complicated.
Oh.
So that's the Falcon Steel case. We didn't allege that in the Pickle case. That was.
Could you have?
We had so much on our plate. That's a great question, man. Maybe.
Well, I'll have to ask Mr. Canina.
Ask Robert, because, Robert took, as I shifted off to Falcon Steel and the Abraham case, Robert shifted over to the hugest, I sound like an 8th grader. There's this big case in Mississippi where they were still targeting Indian people. Indian people were, the common denominator is Indian people are, they have a high regard for Americans, and they have a high tolerance for pain, and they have a great work ethic. But I'll say this, they're too trusting. If you're an attorney, or you show up somewhere with a coat and tie, you can tell them whatever you want, and they'll believe you.
Because you're a figure of trust.
They have
power.
High regard for authority, and I don't know where I was going with that. They're targeted. And Robert ran into a case in Mississippi that is, I don't know if it was 200, it was a lot, maybe more than 200, that they used some of the tactics that we used.
Yeah.
It's all fine-tuned. We found out what didn't work, what did work. Robert fine-tuned it and just crushed these shipyards and actually made, for the victims, I think they made pretty good money. I mean, in the millions of dollars on those cases, which I was always like, I could say, oh, I'm jealous. Why didn't I just jump over there? But Robert ended up having health issues because he was...
Just chronic stress.
Yeah, and you're dealing with hundreds of plaintiffs, and you're dealing with defendants that have a lot of money, and you're the guy. And at that time, Robert might have had a paralegal or a couple of other people helping him from the EEOC, but he's the man. So he's doing that, and he's implementing a lot of the things that we learned on John Pickle. And that became kind of more the gold standard, in my opinion, of trafficking cases. That's, if you want to know how to handle a large volume trafficking case, for those young lawyers that might one day, think about it, first of all, be well financed, but go see what Robert Canino did in Mississippi, and you're gonna see what we did in Pickle, because that was kind of the ground floor, and then Falcon was kind of, it helped, but not in a practical way. Falcon Steel was the New Orleans case,
right,
with 200 guys. And that was, I moved to New Orleans and lived there for a couple of years. And everything I was doing down there is stuff I learned from Joe McDoulet. I learned how to do affidavits.
right.
So I knew that at some point I was going to need everybody's story. So every day I would do affidavits for like a year, because we had 200 of these guys. But they were scattered to the four winds. And I would have to go to Charleston, South Carolina, which is my favorite place in the South, I gotta say. It's beautiful there. I love it. So
I'm obligated to say Savannah's better. But
well, I've heard that. I have heard that. But I would have to go up to Charleston. I would have to go to Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin, which is another beautiful place.
Very different from Charleston and New Orleans.
Right. And then I would have New Orleans. I would have Kansas. Rhode Island was another.
This is before Zoom.
Yeah, no, I would have to go up and meet, because we had so many clients. These guys, and it was not a we, it was me. I mean, just me. Anyway, I would go to Charleston, and there'd be 50 guys working there on one of those bridges. And then I would go to Rhode Island, and there'd be another bridge being built. These guys were building stuff all over the country, but none of them were legal. I mean, is authorized to work, I should say. So they would just go, one guy would get a job at a place that didn't require authorization or identity, legal identity. So there would be 50 of them there the next day. They would drive like all night for a job. To have a job for an Indian person is such a huge deal. It's a huge deal. So they had debts. The same as the Pickle guys, but more of them. And their situation in my book was worse, because they were stuck in, I think, Houma or Thibodaux or one of these little, in a hotel with no food and no work.
Okay.
And the guy there...
So they didn't even have this is my phrase, sort of the cut rate paternalism.
No, they didn't have cut rate paternalism. They had a former... God bless the Navy SEALs. A former Navy SEAL named Chad Chandler, who was, and he had enforcers, and it was violent, and they were. I mean, I've got a picture. You guys are going to have these pictures of a guy that had his head almost sliced off.
Oh. One
of the Falcon guys, and they recruited traitors out of these 200 men who would enforce the rules and would inform on the others. And anyway, one guy almost got his head chopped off, and we had all kinds of violence. And Mark Massey was down there, and they chased him.
Oh.
And Mark drove to the sheriff's office on the west bank of the Mississippi across from Baton Rouge. And, these guys are chasing me and blah, blah, blah. And old Chad Chandler and his goons walk into the same sheriff's office, 10 seconds later and say, "This guy tried to run me over." Mark is real meek and mild and humble, and he's from Oklahoma. And you got these really streetwise, really rough characters. So they put Mark in jail. I've got those papers are out there too. So Mark Massey, St. Mark, he's the Citizen of the Year in Norman, Oklahoma, In the same year, he's in the East Baton Rouge prison. So I go down there. I'm not licensed in Louisiana, and I try to explain to the DA, this is crazy. Do you know who you're dealing with?
Come on, man.
And the DA, of course, DAs are just, if it looks complicated and it's not going to make them, they're not interested. Eventually, they dismissed the case, but he spent time in jail. I had to go to court 2 or 3 times to get it dismissed. It was ridiculous. It was so wrong. So eventually, we have a case of 200 guys, but they're all over the place because they've been freed. They were in this hotel, and they were freed, and they just,
they went where work took
wherever
them.
there was work.
Gotcha.
And Mark says, hey, Pickles kind of at that lull where we're waiting for the second trial. Would you be interested? And I'm like, man, are you kidding? I am so broke. I can't even feed my family. And he's like, no, these guys will pay. And I'm like, ding, ding, ding. So I drive down to New Orleans, and Mark has arranged for a huge protest by the courthouse in New Orleans. No, like it's on, not St. Charles, but over there by the courthouse.
Yeah.
Anyway, so he's got like 200 or 300 Indian people out there with signs, and I show up, and you know how New Orleans is. It's so hot. And it's
hot
so
really doesn't
humid.
do it justice.
And it's humid, and I'm in a coat and tie because I'm like, I've never met these guys before. I need to dress like a lawyer.
You need to get a seersucker suit.
I'm just drenched.
Oh God.
And there's photos and there's TV cameras, and I'm like, oh my goodness, what I got myself into. So we all meet at a hotel later that day, and I tell him, look, man, I don't have any bullets. I do have a gun, but you're going to have to supply the bullets. And I need everybody to pay me $100 a month, because Mark told me that's doable for most of these guys. And I thought, wow, eureka. $100 times 200, I'm going to pay all my bills. This is going to be awesome. So, and based on that promise that these fellows made, I rented a house, then turned it into an office uptown New Orleans. It was great, really nice. And I know this is probably not hero talk here, but I was just relieved. And I started doing the affidavits every day. They would come into the house, and I'd do the affidavits. I'd sleep there. I missed my kid's senior year. Oh. And I was a newlywed, and I could say that's really bad, but we saw Mardi Gras and Jazz Fest. And I had gone to high school and college there, so it was a really good time for me. And I was getting paid for the first 2 months. And then these guys were like, we need a work authorization. And I'm like, T visas, okay, you can get a work card, but it's not going to be easy because there's all kinds of technicality. I don't really know what I'm doing, truthfully. And I'm not really focused on that. And I can't get Catholic Charities interested, and nobody's really interested in helping. So I focus totally on the legal part in district court. I walk into Judge Lance Afric's office, and another good judge. And I've got a deadline. I'm trying to file this petition. I'm like, help me. And he goes, what is human trafficking? And I'm thinking, sorry, am I jacking with the...
No, you're not.
I'm not Italian.
The sun came back out.
I do move my hands sometimes. So anyway, I go in, Judge Afric goes, what's human trafficking? And they just passed the reauthorization of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. So there was a little bit of issue. What is human? So I go, well, Judge, it's transporting people from point A to B by fraud, force, and duress with the intent to reduce them to involuntary servitude. And I was like, oh, thank goodness I knew. He's like, well, I don't know. It sounds just like a busted contract to me, which, it is a busted.
I mean, well,
it is a busted contract. I go, well, that's another way to look at it. He goes, well, how many people you got? I got 215. So he's like, do they speak English? Are they legal here? He goes, if they show up in my courtroom, I'd have to detain them, right, if they're not legal. And I'm like, eek, that's not good. That's not good news.
Well, let me check.
So we would have we would have, scheduling orders, and I'd go in, Judge Afric, and the bad guys would have lawyers, and I would see the bad guys pulling out my communication to my clients out of their briefcase. And that's when it just confirmed to me that we had traitors in the group. Some people were getting paid by the defendants. So what and I was like, Judge, it's kind of weird to sit here and watch Joe Blow pull my letters out of his briefcase.
And those would be privileged.
And they're totally privileged. But, the client, it's privileged to the client.
That's right.
So if the client wants to give the bad guys my documents, then that's their business.
Right.
So, there's nothing, I'm just like, and he goes, well, looks like you lost control of your clients. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to order every one of them to show up in court on such and such a day. And it was actually, you think sometimes judges are just mean and dumb. But this guy was smart because it weeded out a lot of my clients that were not really my clients. So he took it from 215 to like 150 or something. Still a lot of people. But we kind of got rid of a lot of the traitors or people that just weren't interested.
Right.
I kept them on the pleadings because I thought one day it might help them. But it helped me to get control of them. And that's when I started doing this circuit, trying to explain to them that, no, you don't have a work card. No, you're not legal. But I would go into places like in Rhode Island where I saw these guys selling sheets of Social Security cards. And I'm kind of like, oh my goodness, well, what can you do? So it's not my business, and I don't care. I just need to, in one case, I needed to get out. There was a guy that had, the stress level for the plaintiffs is real high too, and he ran his car into a wall in Providence and crawled out, the back, glass everywhere, naked. He lost his mind through stress. And so I had to go visit him in Bridgewater, I think is the prison for the criminally insane.
Yes.
In Massachusetts. Is it Bridgewater?
Bridgewater, Connecticut. I think.
No, it's definitely Massachusetts.
Is it Massachusetts?
Because I saw Plymouth Rock on that same drive.
The very underwhelming Plymouth Rock.
I know, what a ripoff. What a ripoff. I'm like, is that it? Looks like a big piece of concrete with a cage. So, I went to visit that guy, and they were starting to lose their minds for good reason.
Bridgewater, Massachusetts.
Is it Bridgewater?
You are correct.
Home for the criminally insane, not home.
The Bridgewater State Hospital.
There you go. Well, and it was grim. It made Shawshank look like Club Med or something. It was really bad. And that guy was crying like a baby in there, and he's looking to me to, can you get me out of here? I just want to go home. And I'm like, oh, wow, so then I go talk to eventually they deported him. Didn't deport him, he voluntarily left. Thank goodness, because I'd rather be crazy in India than in Bridgewater, And at least you have people that love you there.
Yeah.
So anyway, there was all kinds of adventures. But I lost control of my clients, and they lost interest, and eventually we settled the case, and it's confidential, but it was pretty much nuisance value to cover costs, because I'm traveling everywhere.
Is it one of these settled but no admission of wrongdoing kind of things?
Yes. Okay. So it was one of those deals. And again, it's not a big. I think the bad guys are probably not alive anymore, but I have to respect that confidentiality.
Sure.
I don't really respect it a lot, but the whole point is that these guys lost interest, and a lot of them went back to India. We tried to shift gears. The government wouldn't support us on the T visas. Those were denied. Once the T visas are denied, the way that we were able to do pickle is Joe McDoulet, we got T visas.
Right.
We were the first large group to get T visas. Well, Lou DeBacca, who was President Obama's guy in charge of human trafficking, he's like the pioneer, told me, he said, hey, pickles as far as we're going to stretch on these labor exploitation cases, because there is that intersection, labor exploitation, human trafficking. Mm-hmm. And so the government decided they're not going to help us with the Abraham case, I call it, the Falcon Steel case. Uh-huh. And they denied all the T visas.
What did the Obama administration or what were they wanting to pivot towards in terms of human trafficking or T visas? Who did they want to focus on?
Sex trafficking is every talk I've ever given, they're like, what? I thought we were talking about young girls from Mexico that it's horrible what happens. But no, there's labor exploitation, and I didn't understand India the whole time until I went to India, and I realized how vulnerable they are and how easy it is to rip them off. So that's a high, if you want to get rich, you can go to India and you can bring people over here if you have a tie and a nice suit, and then you sell them to a guy like Chad Chandler of Falcon Steel, and then Chad farms them out to shipyards and other people that are making boats or bridges or whatever. So you have your exploitation in India, where they're fleeced, and then they come here where there's a straw man like Chad Chandler. I have a business, it's called Falcon Steel. We don't actually make anything.
They have a P.O. box.
We have a P.O. box. And what we do is we say we've got 200 skilled welders. And one of these shipping companies in Mississippi or Louisiana needs welders. So I'm going to send 20 welders. You're going to pay them the prevailing wage, whatever it is, $20. And then from there, I'm going to give them like $5 because I'm providing for their housing and their food and their internet. And, it's like the old sharecropping situation.
Yeah, I was even going to go for and say convict lease, which was so prominent in Georgia.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
Excuse me.
You basically have a captive group, and you can farm them out. And every time you farm them out, and they work for $20 an hour, and you collect $15, eureka. The problem with those guys, Mr. Pickle's problem was he wouldn't feed his guys.
Right.
With these guys, the problem was that was not steady work. So you could go work for 2 weeks and make $5 an hour, and then you don't work for another 2 weeks. So the stable job that they've been promised was never there. That was just, so that's caused them to scatter. And at that point, you have no control over your plaintiffs for good reason. I mean, these guys they got families that they need to feed back in India.
Right.
India doesn't have a social safety net. So if you, for instance, are in debt, they will go to your house and pull your family out of that house. They will pull your furniture out of that house. They will, it's liquidation time.
Right.
And then you're on the street. Like if you ever fly into Mumbai, you look down and you got these concrete boxes. Those are high-rise apartments for rich people. And it's usually segregated by religion. Like I stayed in one that the Catholics from Kerala have their box. In between these boxes, you have cardboard these concrete
Like
high-rises.
like
You have cardboard boxes with duct tape, pallets, maybe, as far as you can see. They call it slum tourism. There's a lot of people that will go just to look at the slums. It is a mind blower. When you get back from a trip like that, and I was over there for 2 or 3 weeks, you start to understand real poverty, and you start to understand real desperation, and you start to understand why these guys didn't, like if Americans are abused, we don't suffer in silence. We're going to kick up some fuss. The Indians are much more patient because they've seen, this is just me, I'm not a sociologist, but they've seen so much suffering. I saw bodies, like people get run over in the road, people living in boxes, old ladies come up to you like this, everywhere you are. It's just awful. And you've been warned, don't give her any money because as soon you'll be surrounded. So you can't do that. And it's just a fascinating country with really great people, but they're easily led and easily abused. So I don't know. So that's labor exploitation or human trafficking with a labor bent.
Mm-hmm.
Most people don't know about that because they haven't been to India. They don't have any concept of that. I'm sure there are other countries that are the same.
Like I've heard of Eastern European trafficking for like au pairs,
right.
nannies,
and that's
live-in
that's
domestic.
what gets the most attention for good reason, because you kidnap beautiful girls from Eastern Europe or Mexico or wherever, and that's sex trafficking, and people understand that, and that's like the life expectancy of those girls is nothing. So most of the NGOs and the government influence and resources go to sex trafficking.
Right.
For good reason. I mean, there's no excuse for, what happens with the grown men, but that's how it comes across. It's like, nobody's raping your guys.
Well, to that end, in terms of labor, right now in this country, and this has been true historically, we've gone through periods of tension as it relates to immigration and labor and work. Is there a tension there where you have these foreign-born immigrants coming and doing skilled labor, mm-hmm. that there's not necessarily the wellspring of sympathy or empathy that there would be for sex trafficking or the trafficking of minors or children?
Right.
Is that something that you've confronted as an attorney dealing with these labor trafficking cases?
Well, remember when I tried to recruit big firms to help me?
Yeah.
There's not that much interest in labor exploitation unless there's quick money. And a big case with hundreds of people is you're not going to make any money because it's so expensive to try it. With sex trafficking, it's so brutal. I think it's a cultural issue because us as Americans, we pride ourselves on self-sufficiency, being strong, not taking any shit from anybody, excuse my language. So if you go down to the average factory or coal mine, I mean, I'm from Kentucky, man, they'll smash things up if you don't treat them right. I mean, they're sorry, cousins and uncles and whatnot. That's the worst job in the world. But, you're not going to be mistreated because you have strong unions. And I'm not necessarily a big union guy, but for coal miners, it's necessary. For other people in the United States, when you're accustomed to freedom and to, a base level of respect, mm-hmm. you don't have respect for, especially if you're a blue-collar guy. Like, for instance, we have a lot of irritated blue-collar folks up in the Midwest, the old Rust Belt. And that used to be solid Union, Democrat, mm-hmm. blah, blah, blah. Now it's not, because they feel like they've been swept aside, and they deal with their problems without begging the government or without suing people, and they stand up for themselves, and they're well armed, and Americans, versus what I deal with is people that are, like we said before, just super respectful of authority, and they do not complain hardly at all. I mean, like I said, if Mr. Pickle had fed these guys, that would have been that we wouldn't have a case. If they had stable work with Abraham case, with Falcon Steel, that case would have never been. So if anybody learned anything as far as the employers, first of all, we put the bad guys out of business at every time. And we had a massive victory in the Fifth Circuit on RICO, which now they can apply to other cases. RICO is scary because you triple your damages or whatever it is, now maybe 7 times. You lose more money. So the minute that exploitation or trafficking becomes unprofitable, they stop doing it. It's, and the word gets around. We had a lot of good publicity. Not so, a little bit on Falcon Steel, but definitely on Pickle. You talk to people in Tulsa today, and they're familiar with that case. Mm-hmm. Nobody in Oklahoma is going to try that, anything close to it.
Was the public, and this is obviously a general statement because obviously you'll never have unanimity anywhere, but what was the Tulsa population supportive of your side, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, they were. I mean, because even blue-collar guys that have lost their job understand right and wrong. And they understand when somebody's being cheated. And Oklahoma is, people think of it as backward, but it's really not. It's progressive. It's people there, Woody Guthrie's from Oklahoma. The Bob Dylan Center's in Tulsa. I mean, there's a populist backbone in Tulsa. And when people are mistreated, regardless of their color or anything else, they don't like it because it could be them. And it has been them. You think of Grapes of Wrath. There is a history in Oklahoma of standing up for oppressed working class people, which is what these folks are, oppressed working class people. As far as being jealous, I never had, even the guys that got laid off, they never said, why do you care? Or anything. They knew why we cared, because they saw it. Mm-hmm. And they knew that, hey man, if it was me, you'll see those depositions, there's no animosity. Plus Tulsa's the churches are super powerful there. And that every one of those churches, not just the Christian churches, but the synagogue, the Hindu temple, the mosque, everybody jumped in. It was what do you call it whenever ecumenical?
Yeah.
Excuse me. Mm-hmm. Been talking too much.
No.
So anyway, there you go. There's Falcon Steel. You're going to see these papers, and this is to those that unfortunately are going to have to wade through, and I tried my best to organize them. I kept those papers for 20 years, and I don't know why, but I'm just stream of consciousness here, but if you really look at the documents, you're going to see some really interesting stories. Every man, in both cases, has a big, thick affidavit. If you didn't want to read anything else, read their stories, because it's, and you've got an audience of 1 billion people in India that are kind of aware, but need to remember. It's almost like remember. You got to remember history, or you're doomed to repeat it. You need to remember what happened to these people so that it doesn't happen anymore. And that's as simple as it gets, really.
Right.
I mean,
Well, right before we end, I wanted to talk a little bit about, you mentioned that you were retiring, but I was looking on your website, and very prominently on your website is a verse from Psalm 146.
Right.
The Lord watches over the sojourners; He upholds the widow and the fatherless. What was your thinking in, of all the Bible verses that have to do with immigration or strangers, as in some translations? Why did you settle on that verse, and what does it mean to you, and what does it mean to your practice?
Wow, thank you so much for that. That is like the key to everything. That's a great question. I didn't have a website until like a couple of years ago. I didn't know, why do I need one? But when my wife and I, we're both Christians, Orthodox Christians, and when I picked that verse, we actually picked it together, was there are people that are powerless in this world. And we try to read through our Bible every day, and you see how the Lord looks after the weak that can't help themselves. That is who? That is the orphans, the widows, and the aliens, or in some translations, sojourners, travelers going through. And the law applies to all of them equally, and the rest of us are responsible. And if and my feeling is, as I've reached the last, however many years I have left, is, you never lay on your deathbed thinking, I wish I had more money, or I wish I'd spent more time in the office, even I wish I had visited more places, or whatever. These things they're fleeting. It's really what you invest in that's eternal, that stays with you when you're gone. And what is eternal? In my book, it's God's Word and the souls of people. Souls are eternal, and God's Word is eternal. God's Word is the final authority for me. And how do I spend the few years that I have? I've seen the richest lawyers in the world. I've worked for them, the smartest lawyers in the world. I've worked for them. And some of them are dead. Mr. O'Quinn smashed his car into a tree in Houston a few years ago. Steve Sussman died of COVID a couple of years ago, who was a genius. The first lawyer that I ever heard about getting $600 an hour back in the day. And then there's, Mr. Haynes and Fullenwider, Racehorse Haynes. He's gone. And I always wonder about these old bosses. If they could come back, what would they tell me to do with my time? And there's nothing I'd rather do than help the sojourners, the aliens, the widows, and the orphans. I'd add the veterans that are disabled to that list. And I've tried to get into the Veterans Affairs work, but it's hyper-technical, kind of like immigration. And I don't know if I can learn one more new thing. So there you go. Thank you so much for that question. Yeah. I mean, my faith is everything to me. It's what keeps me going when I'm broke or angry or discouraged, and I'm so thankful that we've kind of landed on our feet here. I mean, sometimes I go outside, I'm like, I can't believe I'm here.
Well, I think that is a fantastic place to leave it, Kent. Go ahead.
No, I'm just going to say, as far as these documents go, I didn't pull anything out. It's all there, and you're going to see uncertainty. You're going to see mistakes. You're going to see good things and bad things. Go easy. I wanted the historians at the University of Georgia or wherever you're from to see the whole picture and to maybe see, the purpose in these cases and maybe write a book so that other people don't have these problems. So that's it. Sorry about the disorganization.
Well, thank you, Kent, for your time, and thank you also for donating these records to the University of Georgia. So we're very, very thankful to have them, and very proud to be able to preserve them and provide access.
How long did I talk? I feel like I've worn you guys out.
No,
I just think it's